As a listener to the Mood and Food podcast, you can save a full 20% off the complete range of vitamins and supplements for your mental and physical health at iGenus.com. All you have to do is enter the code ADDVITALITY in capitals at checkout. That's ADDVITALITY in capitals at checkout, and your order will be discounted by 20%. And the website at iGenus.com contains some great articles and health information too. That's IGENNUS.com. Hi, this is Andrew Bridgewater, Chartered Psychologist, and welcome to the latest edition of the Mood and Food podcast. It's been a few weeks since I produced an episode, and I've just been quietly in the background getting on with my ketogenic lifestyle, which you'll have heard me talk about in the previous few episodes. And I've now got more results, more improvements, more things to talk to you about in relation to it, because it's just over 10 and a half weeks since I first started this way of living. And as I say, I think way of living is a better way of describing it than a diet. So ketogenic relates to the sort of physiological process that happens when we start living this way by pretty much cutting out carbohydrates, processed foods and sugars. Because ketones are these small fat molecules which, as I've said before, are small enough to pass between the blood and the brain and feed our brain the right fats, given it's 70 or 80% fat. And at 64, I'm just experiencing some really interesting results. And as I said before, I think something happens, or things happen to our physiology and the way that we process foods and our metabolism later in life. And if we don't do anything about it, this thing called visceral fat is just going to keep building. This fat that secretes itself around our vital organs, and it's very difficult to remove it surgically. I've listened to podcasts which have talked about this. It's almost impossible because it kind of widens itself around the vital organs. Sounds pretty awful, doesn't it? It's almost like it's strangling them. Now, I haven't had a visceral fat test or an ECG which would show it, but I just feel differently after 10 and a half weeks. So I think I've alluded to arthritis before. I had some arthritis symptoms. Those have all but disappeared. I have often suffered with hay fever around this time of year. Not had that at all this year. I felt my mental clarity has improved. So I've experienced a couple of stressful episodes. One where I thought I'd lost some money through the financial system, but it was just taking longer than it should have done to connect. And rather than becoming anxious, not sleeping well that night, I dealt with it as a matter of course. And that felt like a noticeable difference. The differences are subtle, but they're palpable, they're realisable, and I'm certainly experiencing them in my mind and body. And that is just wonderful, a wonderful thing to experience at this stage of life. So in this episode, I wanted to talk to you about some foods that are particularly good for removing visceral fat. And they're easy to consume. They're easy to incorporate into your diet. Now, you won't hear them talked about on carnivore, because the carnivore diet and lifestyle is pretty much meat, fish, and if you're pushing it, eggs. But I've included dairy products in my diet. I've included a small amount of fruits, and I'll tell you which ones as we go on. Because actually I've found that for my metabolism, they work fine. And I think we're all slightly different. And what you have to do is sort of settle into a way of living that feels right for you and gives you the results that you want without being overly prescriptive or overly boring. So the first food I'm going to mention to you that is really good for removing visceral fat are walnuts. And I've found incorporating walnuts with a small amount of high cocoa dark chocolate really good, because dark chocolate is actually the second food I was going to tell you about, but I quite like them together. So a square of dark chocolate, maybe a large square broken up into 4/4 with some walnuts, makes a really delicious snack. And it's very sustaining. I've found that it will keep me going. One of the things I've noticed about this way of living is that I'm probably having 2 meals a day rather than 3. And actually I'm cutting down on food costs, I think, because one of the criticisms of this approach is it can cost more, but not in my case. Food number 3 after dark chocolate and walnuts would be things like oily fish like tuna, sardines, salmon and mackerel. Really easy to consume, and I've told you before about how I managed to travel all day flying to Cyprus on a tin of sardines amongst other things. It's so easy to do. Blueberries, wonderful superfood. I've talked about blueberries many times over the last few years. I love them. And I particularly love them incorporated into another food which is very good for visceral fat removal, which is Greek yogurt, strained Greek yogurt with a good fat percentage. So I take the 10% fat one, which I can get from Lidl here in Cyprus. And when I add some walnuts, some blueberries to that, you could add walnuts to it actually, but I just take some frozen blueberries out of the freezer, put them in the bottom of a bowl and defrost for a few minutes, and then add the yogurt on top. And what I've been finding is I don't need to sweeten that, because what's happened is that my taste buds have changed. So the 85% dark chocolate that I was telling you about earlier, which used to sort of taste quite bitter, actually tastes pleasantly sweet now. It's really fascinating how the taste buds adapt and what that says about what's happening inside the body. Because I found that taste buds are a bit of a barometer of our health, really. When we're sort of craving unhealthy foods, our taste buds demand them. Another really good food, extra virgin olive oil. Now, you may think this sounds awful, but a couple of teaspoons of extra virgin olive oil on their own, particularly in the morning, I found that very helpful. And it's also really helpful to keep the digestion moving, because it provides a little bit more fat through the digestive tract. And the final one I wanted to talk about are chia seeds. Now, I found those quite hard to get hold of, but I have found a shop here in Cyprus that sells them. And what I've been doing is sprinkling them over the top of my yogurt and blueberries. And they're another superfood. And as I say, really good for working on the visceral fat. So I've just given you 7 foods there: walnuts, dark chocolate, oily fish like sardines, salmon, mackerel, blueberries, chia seeds, extra virgin olive oil, and Greek yogurt with a reasonable fat content. And this is the paradox. The fat content is not the problem as long as you're not consuming carbohydrates. And I'm actually consuming very, very few carbohydrates these days. One of the things I do enjoy is a bit of fruit, and as I say, I talked about blueberries in there, but there are 2 other fruits that I wanted to mention: pomegranates, which are very easy to get hold of over here in Cyprus, or even pomegranate juice, which is not sweetened with any sort of artificials like sugar or anything else, is very good for visceral fat removal. As are berries, strawberries, blueberries I've mentioned, raspberries, and also watermelon. Wonderful over here. Really, really thirst-quenching and delightful. And the final fruit I wanted to mention, which most people wouldn't think of as a fruit, are avocados, which I love when they're sensibly ripe. Cut in half, remove the stone, drizzle some extra virgin olive oil, ground black pepper, ground rock salt. You've just got a lovely lunch there. It's an all-round food, avocado. Not strictly carnivore, obviously, but actually highly nutritious, and I found it very health-giving and very enjoyable. So lots of ideas there. You don't have to be boring when you're going keto. I have a group of friends over here in Cyprus, and I've been talking to them about what I've been doing, and they've been sort of saying, oh, I couldn't do that. Actually, I think some of them are starting to realise, as they've seen my body change shape and my energy improve, and maybe this is something they want to look into. So if any of them are listening, please do. So there we go. 7 foods that are really good for removing visceral fat, and some fruits that I've particularly enjoyed, which are also good for it. So you don't have to cut out fruit altogether. I would cut out things like grapes and bananas. Luckily, though I did used to find bananas, I'm not eating them anymore. because they are very high in carbohydrates, and grapes very high in natural sugar, obviously. So there you have it. If you have any questions about this, the ketogenic lifestyle, or anything else related to mood and food for that matter, please do drop me an email, andrew@andrewbridgewater.com, and I'll look forward to speaking to you on the next episode of the Mood and Food podcast. Bye for now.